There's a yellow rose in Texas I'm going there to see. No other fella knows her, no other, only me. She cried so when I left her, it broke her loving heart. And if we ever meet again, we'll never...
We're losing our country, and we may have already lost it over this issue. Hundreds of thousands of acres, maybe millions, we're watching millions of acres of private property that the Border Patrol do not have the resources to watch. And that's what we do. It's not just my property, it's a lot of adjacent property and property, private property all the way nearly to Del Rio. And then all the way down to Brownsville. Before they cross that river, they pay a coyote or a cartel operative or a coyote that works for the cartel big money. The cartel travel agents are all over the world. And to substantiate that, we encounter people from all over the world out here that are sneaking through. A lot of the family units are giving up there at the valley, but the ones that cannot give up for asylum are coming through this private property that we watch as Texas Border Volunteers. So we've been doing this for 13 years, and it's not doing anything but getting worse. These Central Americans all pay a minimum of $7,000. The Mexicans are even paying up to $3,000. They're paying, a lot of them from down in southern Mexico are paying $900 just to be able to cross Mexico safely. The Bangladeshis are paying $22,000 to $27,000. The Chinese are paying up to $70,000 now. They become an indentured servant for 10 years when they get here. And we had Chinese during our last operation just a week ago, less than a week ago, and they got away. And that's a huge, huge bunch that the State Department and Homeland Security are more concerned about, or the Chinese coming in here. The Chinese are not only the #1 concern for Homeland Security and the State Department, but they also don't send them back. They keep them for up to 6 months in Pearsall, Texas in a detention center, interrogate them, they get no information out of them. Some of them speak English, some of them don't. Most of them speak Mandarin Chinese, and they let them go. But policy is #1. We need a policy that strictly forbids them from coming in here, and the consequences are them being sent straight back. And that's of utmost importance. What we've got now is no policy. We've got loopholes that Congress refuses to fix. And I'm afraid it's going to take a Republican Congress in 2020 to try to get it done, because these Democrats are not doing a damn thing about it. We have these emergency stations on private property here in Brooks County. I think there's about 8 of them. They're about a $65,000 or $70,000 taxpayer expense item. They have a blue beacon on them at night. They've got a button on them and a 5-gallon water jug that the Border Patrol keeps full. And it's got a message in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. And essentially what it says is that if you're sick or lost or can't keep up and you need help, push this button and help will come. After the Clinton administration, it was really getting bad. That's when we started seeing the other than Mexicans. The first person to die on my ranch was from Pakistan, and that was 1991. And him and his brother were running from the Border Patrol, and it was a real hot July day, probably 105 degrees. And as he attempted to cross my north fence, he fell over dead with a heart attack. Since then, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. More dead bodies, bigger groups, more attitude and more danger because of the disposition of the people in the groups. And now you just don't go out on private property unless you're armed, and I'm talking about maybe more than 1 firearm. You need to have a rifle and a pistol with plenty of bullets, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know who's under the next tree. You never know the size of the group, and you never know if it's a group with solid gang members, because we see that and we encounter that. every kind of gang, Mexican street gang you can imagine, Tango Blast, Pistoleros, all of these guys are coming in here to work in organized crime, stealing in Houston and all the sanctuary cities they go. They live off of crime, and they work for the cartels. They're the ones that bring these groups in here, and they're very brutal. I've seen them. We've seen them beat people up that couldn't keep up, whip them with a stick. We watched them at a distance with our night vision and stuff. We found women that they walk off and leave. We find women that have left the group because they knew they were going to be sexually assaulted. And then we find women that are sick, and we find women that are dead. And, you know, young people and males as well. It's despicable. We see the depravity of man in Brooks County, Texas, beyond the doubt. And for somebody from up north to tell me that it's a manufactured crisis, I'd like to choke them.
We have a president of the United States who has created a fiction about a crisis at the border, and he has held up the United States government and its workers around his vanity project called a wall.
I'd like to bring them by the neck down here and put them out on my property any given night, or on some of my neighbor's property, and just let them sit there and see what happens, to encounter these groups and see what's really going on. It's just insane. They don't know, and they don't care, because we're losing our country, and we may have already lost it over this issue. These are the kind of things our community has had to endure. I have a guy working for me that lives out here on a ranch 10 miles out of town here, and his wife is a nurse, a home health care nurse. And there's a T, he comes up to a bigger road to come into town, and she has had her car taken away from her twice at that T by illegal aliens swarming the car, pulling her out. In one case, she had her infant son in the car seat, and she had to fight with them to get her infant son, and they turned around and went north in that car at 100 miles an hour and rolled it at the first curve 9 miles north. They'd probably killed that child if he'd have been in there. But she had to fight with them. This happened twice to this one person. And this is the kind of stuff we have to endure all the time here. And most of the community's fed up with it. They want it stopped. It's a huge burden on our community. I've actually probably have over 500 photographs of dead people that we've found, or the sheriff's department's found, or some of my neighbors have found on private property here in Brooks County alone. And they're pretty upsetting, and we find a lot of them. We border Starr County, which borders the Mexican border, where the Zeta cartels are headquartered.
The criminal paramilitary Los Zetas was created over 20 years ago by deserters from the Mexican Army's Special Airborne units, many of whom had been trained at the U.S. Army's School of Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia. The Zetas hired out as enforcers for the top crime syndicate, the Gulf Cartel, but soon replaced them to become the most feared gang in Mexico. In the last few years, they shifted their main base of operations from Tamaulipas to Guatemala, which they now virtually control. Their tactics are revealed in the U.S. Army's Army War College's book-length study, The Evolution of Los Zetas in Mexico and Central America, Sadism as an Instrument of Cartel Warfare.
Starr County and Brooks County are very rural. There's not a lot of people living out on these big ranches. There's thousands of smuggling trails through here with a lot of exit patterns. In other words, they can start out on their plan A, but if they run into law enforcement, they'll go to plan B and change their route and come out somewhere else. The coyotes and the gang members that work for the cartels know the routes real well through here. And all of that together makes it real lucrative for the cartels to be able to get their human cargo and drug cargo through this county. Whenever somebody's cramped up or gets sick or can't finish the trip, they walk off and leave them. They leave kids out here. We find kids out here all the time. Alive, yeah, and we found dead ones, but mostly live. You know, they're staggering around out here, lost. apprehended over 7,000 a week. It's probably a pretty good sized caravan a week. And the amazing thing about it, probably a huge percentage of these families are not real families. They're borrowed kids and borrowed husbands and stuff like that, maybe up to 50%.
One of the things, again, right now that we're really trying to bring to the forefront is the exploitation of these family units and the amount of money that's bringing to the cartels, you know, and the exploitation of the children. It's definitely something that's happening. We're trying to gather as much statistics as possible, and again, trying to bring that to the forefront to the assistant U.S. attorneys so that they can help us push that message up to the Beltway, so that we can at least make some ground in regards to that. Because if we can eliminate the mass migration of families and children and the exploitation of them, then we'll be able to concentrate on doing more of the border security work that we want to.
So there's a lot of fraud there. They're fraudulent, which is, you know, to be expected. You know, they know the loopholes and here they come. The sad thing about it is we'll never get Congress to do anything about it until, you know, the crime and everything and the expenditure for our social services is just when we're broke. I really think Trump needs to do some kind of an executive order to shut it down. Otherwise, we're going to be dealing with it for a long, long time. Sometimes these trucks are actually loaded with, you know, 2,500 pounds of marijuana or something like that. We see the backpackers, and we, you know, that probably have something along the lines of maybe methamphetamine or cocaine in their backpacks. We see those. And then we see the coyotes leading these groups of people through here. And in some cases, we see maybe 4 or 5 backpackers with a big group of people. There might be 20 people in a group and then 4 or 5 backpackers in there with them. When they get to a certain point north of that checkpoint, the backpackers peel off and go another direction. So we've seen that happen as well. So some of the coyotes do have their own thermal vision equipment and night vision equipment. And radio systems. They have the same radio system that we have, and they monitor our signals, and we can monitor theirs.
We chased them. They were equipped with caltrops, which is a makeshift piece of equipment where they weld nails together and throw them at us when we start chasing them to flatten our tires.
Just during this last off, we had one of our volunteers report a group of 6, and that coyote came back in Spanish and told him he was going to come hunt him down and cut him up into 1,000 pieces with his machete. So, oh, absolutely. We find machetes out here all the time. We find weapons. If they get caught with a weapon, it's an extra 10 years. So they discard them, and we find them. We had a coyote with a vehicle a couple of years ago running from city police tried to pull him over, because they really recognized the plates weren't valid, and he was probably in a stolen vehicle, and he was. And he was running so fast, he ran through a T in a neighborhood, ran into an elderly woman's house, ran in through her bedroom, and killed her. And that's just one incident. We had a group of 21 Somalians, probably about 12 miles off the highway, way back in the middle of nowhere, and the coyote had run off and left them. They were lost. These guys were all about 6'5", 7 feet tall, and it was in an area where radios didn't work, cell phones didn't work, so we had to come out of there and go to a spot where we could call the Border Patrol. But by the time the Border Patrol got there, they were gone. They got away. They're probably going to Detroit, you know, to vote for that representative that now represents them there. This whole thing has had a huge negative impact on our community and just about every community in Texas in some respect. We buy their bus tickets and we feed them for the amount of time that they're incarcerated. And then we fly them all over the United States at our tax dollar expense. They fill those airplanes up in McAllen every day. There's a huge expenditure and handling all these people. All of these people are paying organized crime to be brought in here, and they're having a devastating impact on private property. They burn ranches down, they burn ranch houses down, they cut fences and cattle get out, livestock get on the highway. They destroy and damage water sources for livestock. They trash out the property. They leave a lot of trash that the livestock actually consume. The cattle will eat these plastic bags and things like that, and it'll kill the cattle. The consequences and the devastation of private property is staggering. I have one client that is right on the river south of Laredo, and he had his fences cut 17 times in 1 week, by the traffic coming across the river on his property. You can go down south of that checkpoint on the west side of the highway and see the fence damage. Even north of the checkpoint in the pickup zone, across the highway from me, the fences are dramatically torn up and damaged. The drop-off zone is south of the checkpoint, where they drop the traffic off, the people off. They climb over the fences to get into the private property and hit these trails to circumvent the checkpoint. And then when they get to the pickup zone, that's where I live. We heard last night from one of the superior agents, one of the head agents from the Rio Grande Valley sector, that this is going to be the case for a while until we're able to get some kind of a system that allows them to send them back and not have to process them and keep them here, because it's tying up a lot of agents that we depend on to be for our security as we live out in these private ranches and have to deal with this traffic coming across the border. So it makes it real lucrative for smuggling, because most of the time this traffic will never see another person or come to a house or a ranch house. And so and the oak canopy and the mesquite canopy here really provides cover, especially at night, for helicopters and Homeland Security aircraft with infrared and cameras and stuff. It's very, very difficult to spot traffic through all of this canopy. These trees heat up in the daytime, and so they light up a thermal at nighttime, and you just can't see anybody underneath it. So it makes it real, real lucrative. We need a bill that designates all of these checkpoints coming up from the border that are another county up from the border. We need a rule or a law to designate these counties a border county, so that we can get grant money for our sheriff's department, federal funding like the border counties do, to be able to fight this, because this is ground zero here. People in the valley don't see what we see. It's going to take more than the fence. What we really need, number one, is policy. We need a policy to send these people back where they came from, and that's the number one priority. After that, we need more Border Patrol agents. They need more technology, more night vision cameras and night vision equipment, thermal imaging equipment, more four-wheel drive vehicles, and more aircraft. We need more air support here at night to be able to catch this traffic that's coming through at nighttime, and we don't see enough of it. So it's going to take all of that, and then we also need some kind of a program to punish the people that are hired, and that's going to be of utmost importance as well. We need to get rid of the magnet that's pulling them in here. That has to end. That just it's got to stop. We need to start sending them back. Even if he has to do a special mandate or executive order to do that, it needs to happen, because Congress is not getting it done. They're not going to get it done now that the Democrats are in control. It's not going to happen. At my expense, it's not going to happen. They don't care about me. Our own representative here doesn't care about us. He's wagging Nancy Pelosi's tail, and follow the leader.
A nation without borders is not a nation.
Ever since President Trump took office, the Border Patrol morale is the best we've ever seen it. And that's because they've got a president now that has their back. But we still need policy. We need a policy change to get rid of the loopholes to keep this traffic from coming. And as soon as we start loading up C-130s at Moore Field down there in the Rio Grande Valley with these illegal aliens and sending them straight home the next day after they show up here, then that policy is going to probably forbid or detract others from coming up here on these caravans. So this is of utmost importance. We need a policy that sends them right back home. We're seeing them become more aggressive, these groups out on the private property. They become more emboldened because they're watching the news. They see what these Democrats are doing that are open border advocates. And, you know, that alone is creating a situation where these people, by the time they get here north of the checkpoint, they're dangerous. You know, they've become more dangerous for us. So it's just like that individual that said he was going to chop up one of my volunteers into 1,000 pieces with a machete. Most of the people in this community are not in favor of this traffic coming through. A lot of the people work on ranches, or they own ranches, they own private property. Even here in town, they've had people break in their homes. There's nothing good about it as far as this community is concerned. Our hospital closed down 25 years ago. And this is happening all over Texas and all over the United States, where these rural hospitals have to take care of these people whenever they're brought in by the Border Patrol or anybody else at our expense. Just dealing with the dead bodies here in Brooks County, Texas, has broke our county. Because in a lot of situations, an autopsy is called. We have to pay for that autopsy. We have to pay for handling these bodies. It's outrageous. It affects our ability to rebuild our infrastructure, our rural roads going out to ranch country, and it's broke our county, and it keeps it broke. So you've got some segments in the Rio Grande Valley that do not deal with what we deal with here, and they lean towards the liberal side. The mayor of McAllen, the chief of police of McAllen, but that's not the way most of the people in McAllen think and feel. So there is a liberal segment here in South Texas that is sympathetic, but by and far, in my opinion, most of the people are against it and want it stopped. We're dealing with a number of diseases that come out of Mexico. Pyroplasmosis in horses, it's a specific tick that transmits that disease, and in horses, and it's prevalent in Mexico, and now we've had it here in Texas as a result of the proliferation of that tick across the border, and in a lot of cases that tick being carried on traffickers' clothing. Other diseases as well, human diseases, multi-drug resistant TB, dengue fever, all kinds of different diseases that school children in Texas are showing up with some of this stuff because the kids in the classroom probably have not been screened and are transmitting that disease to their classmates. We've got some TB infected herds here in the panhandle of Texas that is a human strain that came from Mexico. We've never seen it before. And it's actually threatening our TB-free state status. There's a lot of commerce going back and forth. A lot of agriculture. It's probably one of our top partners in economics and trading is Mexico, and I just sent 12 bucking bulls to Mexico yesterday, that rodeo bulls. And last week I did 144 buffalo that are going to a senator in the state of Chihuahua. So, you know, it's a huge and trade issue with Texas. But he needs to do something. If anything, put the American military down on the Mexican southern border and stop it.
A nation without borders is not a nation.
There's a yellow rose in Texas I'm going there to see. No other fella knows her, no other, only me.